The expectations addressed within this video and in the PDC Energy's Contractor Expectations Manual apply to all contractors and subcontractors who provide services and/or deliver goods to PDC sites. PDC Energy values the safety of all workers and the protection of the environment. PDC is committed to having incident-free operations, and this commitment relies on collaboration between and coordination with PDC contractors, subcontractors, and their employees. This video establishes and communicates the core environmental, health, and safety, or EHS, requirements for contractors, subcontractors, and their employees while performing work or providing services on PDC property, equipment, or facilities. This video is intended to supplement and enhance, but not to replace, the contractor's own EHS program, management system, or written procedures which the contractor is required to develop and implement. PDC expects that all contractors, contractor employees, consultants, agents, and subcontractors watch this video. Watching this video serves as acknowledgement of the contractor's obligation to take responsibility for compliance with all environmental, health, and safety rules, regulations, ordinances, and other laws, and for directing, overseeing, and controlling activities of its own employees and subcontractors on any PDC site. Please note that contractors or subcontractors who have not viewed this video will not be allowed on PDC locations. Lesson 1. Environmental Protection. PDC is committed to protecting the environment and to assuring the health and safety of workers and the public. No work should be conducted at PDC facilities at the expense of the health and safety of workers or the public, or at the expense of the environment, no matter how urgent or important the task is. We expect contractors to take whatever steps are necessary to protect all people and property. We also expect contractors to comply with all applicable federal, state, and local regulations. PDC requires contractors and subcontractors to comply with all federal and state air quality regulations. Some of PDC's air quality permits or programs require contractor action or records to remain compliant, and contractors must provide compliance information in a complete and timely manner. This includes performing maintenance, providing operating or maintenance records, passing performance tests, conducting inspections, and so on. Before contractors make any temporary openings in a firewall, berm, or dike, they must obtain permission to do so from an authorized PDC representative. Also, any such opening cannot be left open overnight without PDC permission. Wastes generated by the contractor, such as waste oil from equipment, are the sole responsibility of the contractor and subcontractor. Wastes generated on behalf of PDC, such as tank sludge, produced water, used glycol, used compressor oil, and/or condensate, should be managed according to instructions from the authorized PDC representative, unless these wastes are generated as part of the contractor's assigned duties. Anytime a contractor is approached or contacted by any regulatory inspector while performing services for PDC, we require the contractor to stop work immediately and inform an authorized PDC representative. PDC expects that a contractor's on-site supervisor or supervisors will perform regular job site inspections of operations and participate in joint inspections with authorized PDC representatives when requested. PDC reserves the right to access the contractor's EHS policies, programs, procedures, or training records upon request to perform any review deemed necessary to assure compliance with this manual and applicable federal, state, or local EHS regulations. The contractor is expected to cooperate fully with these inspections. Any excavation, earth moving, soil stripping, brush clearing, and other earthwork must be conducted in a manner that minimizes or eliminates adverse effects on soil erosion and sedimentation and must comply with all applicable laws and regulations. Contractors are required to use industry best management practices, or BMPs, to prevent excessive soil erosion due to wind or stormwater. Before contractors use herbicides on PDC facilities, they must obtain permission to do so from an authorized PDC representative, and they must be trained and/or certified according to federal and state regulatory requirements. In addition, contractors are required to provide their employees basic information and training on work procedures that may impact wildlife and plant species found around PDC locations. All contractors must follow and adhere to federal, state, and local laws on the protection and preservation of sensitive and endangered wildlife and vegetation. If protected animal or plant life and/or habitat is disturbed, the contractor must stop activity in the area and notify an authorized PDC representative. Lesson 2. Health. PDC expects that contractors' first aid resources are on site at all times and must comply with OSHA's medical and first aid standard. PDC requires contractors to maintain their employees' first aid and CPR certifications. Also, contractors should train their employees to OSHA bloodborne pathogen standard due to the possibility of exposure to potential infectious materials. OSHA's Hazard Communication, or HAZCOM standard, provides workers with information on the hazardous properties of chemicals, how to detect exposure, recommendations on how to protect themselves, and emergency treatment in the event of exposure. PDC requires all contractors' employees, workers, and subcontractors who work with chemicals or other hazardous materials to be trained in HAZCOM procedures and protections, including PDC's HAZCOM plan. In addition, contractors must develop, implement, and follow a hazardous chemical usage program which minimizes the risks of spills, illness, and injury on PDC worksites. Contractors should make sure their workers are aware of applicable HAZCOM plans, where the safety data sheets, or SDSs, are, and how to understand them, and where to find and how to use the appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE, as required by state and federal regulations. Finally, all chemical containers which are on site or are brought on site by contractors must have the appropriate HAZCOM labels and/or placards. To help contractors, the authorized PDC representative will communicate the identity of any hazardous chemicals to contractor employees or visitors who may be immediately exposed while at a PDC location. In addition, the PDC representative will inform contractors about the labeling system being used, the protective measures to be taken, the safe handling procedures to be used, and the location and availability of SDS while working at a PDC location. Contractors must be aware of potential exposure to hydrocarbon vapors and other potential hazards at the job site. In March 2015, OSHA issued a one-page tank hazard alert addressing exposure to and risk prevention techniques for worker activities that may involve hydrocarbon exposure. While PDC does not specifically endorse any of these specific OSHA suggestions or procedures, they may provide a useful resource for contractors who must develop their own programs in this area. As with all topics addressed in this video and in the Contractor Expectations Manual, contractors are responsible for staying current with developments regarding particular tasks and procedures in this area. Contractors are solely responsible for developing specific procedures for their own employees and areas of expertise relating to tank hazards, hydrocarbon vapor exposures, and hazardous atmospheres. Because each site is unique, contractors should always account for site-specific conditions and, when necessary, work closely with PDC personnel regarding a given facility configuration for any task that may involve potential hydrocarbon vapor exposure. If contract work will involve potential exposure to tank hazards, hydrocarbon vapor exposures, and/or other hazardous atmospheres, contractors and subcontractors working on PDC energy locations must provide their employees with personal four-gas monitors. Contractors must also train their employees on how to properly use these monitors. As contractors develop these procedures, it is vital that they understand the lines of communication and the relationships between the parties involved in the transfer of oil and gas products. In many cases, the contractors who are responsible for product transfer, gauging, or related activities are contracted with companies that purchase PDC's oil and gas products, and not with PDC. This means that where oversight or input is needed on these safety matters, it may come from another contractor instead of from PDC itself. Even though there are separate roles and responsibilities for dealing with potential hydrocarbon vapor or hazardous atmosphere exposure at PDC sites, PDC has developed its own set of protocols and procedures which apply at all PDC facilities, as well as a set of basic procedures for two types of facilities. One is sites with tank isolation valves, and the other is sites with other blowdown configurations. Further detail to guide contractors on the general procedures to be implemented at all PDC facilities can be found in the Contractor Expectations Manual. In addition, PDC has specific requirements for monitoring devices, protective measures, and other administrative and engineering controls that all PDC employees and contractors who perform these tasks must follow. For example, automation has been installed at many PDC locations on condensate and/or water storage tanks to gauge tank fluid level heights. When this equipment is available, PDC requires all of its employees, contractors, and subcontractors to use this equipment instead of manually gauging the tank. PDC will continue to work closely with all contractors to provide information on these procedures and to work with contractors to help them develop their own procedures to address conditions at PDC facilities. PDC expects contractors to train their employees about the hazards and necessary precautions required when hydrogen sulfide, or H2S, may be present at the job site. At a minimum, contractors are expected to monitor for the presence of H2S at designated locations, as well as to take any necessary additional safeguards, such as ventilation, respiratory protection, or windsocks, based on the anticipated exposure concentrations. Contractors are responsible for assuring compliance with any applicable state and/or federal regulations addressing hazards associated with working in areas where H2S is or may be present, including the American National Standards Institute and the American Society of Safety Engineers, ANSI, ASSE, Z390.1, accepted practices for hydrogen sulfide safety training programs where applicable. Lesson 3. Safety. In the event there is an on-site incident, such as an injury or illness, an environmental release, a vehicle accident, property or equipment damage, or near miss at a PDC site, or in connection with contractors' work for PDC, PDC expects to be notified immediately. Contractors must verbally report the incident immediately to an authorized PDC representative, then follow up with a written incident report. As soon as the incident scene is stabilized, under control, and all victims have received the necessary care and treatment, the contractor must begin an investigation. To preserve evidence and assist in the incident analysis, the incident scene must not be disturbed or altered except to allow rescue personnel to access it, to secure the area, and to control or eliminate any additional damage. As appropriate under the circumstances, PDC expects each contractor to inform its employees and subcontractors of the circumstances resulting in an incident and to provide guidance on ways to prevent similar incidents in the future. PDC expects contractors to take responsibility for reporting and correcting all incidents relating to the work the contractors provide for PDC. In addition, the contractor will be solely and fully responsible for the cleanup and reporting of any environmental release relating to its activities, and for any claims or losses that result from any environmental release relating to its activities. PDC requires contractors to train their employees on recognizing contamination signs such as odors, soil discoloration, or dead vegetation. Contractors should not remove any potentially contaminated soil or water from the environmental release site without prior approval by an authorized PDC representative. When appropriate and with approval from an authorized PDC representative to conduct waste-related operations, contractors will comply with any applicable hazardous waste operations and emergency response, or HAZWOPER standards, and other state and/or federal regulations. If contractors are unsure of reportable quantities or regulatory agencies to contact in the event of a contaminating release, contact an authorized PDC EHS representative for guidance and reporting requirements. PDC requires contractors to develop, implement, and enforce their own emergency response plan appropriate for the type of service they perform. All personnel working at the site must have access to the contractor's plan on site. Also, PDC expects the contractor to make sure that all emergency equipment on site is appropriate for the work to be performed, readily accessible, and in good working condition. All personnel working on the site should know where the equipment is and how to use it properly. Because fire prevention is vital to safe operations, PDC requires contractors to provide fire suppression and protection equipment, and to train their employees how to use the equipment in a manner that fits the work being performed, as well as the environmental conditions. Please note that PDC recommends using ABC-rated fire extinguishers at its facilities. Contractors must also develop procedures for managing operations during storms and extreme or threatening weather events. These procedures must emphasize the safety and protection of human health and on-site personnel as a first priority. At minimum, in the event of extreme or threatening weather, personnel on site should be moved to a safe area until conditions allow for work to resume. All routes of access and egress from PDC sites and facilities must be kept clear of obstructions at all times. Obstructions include vehicles, equipment, trash, power and phone lines, temporary living quarters, and other materials or equipment. All vehicles should be parked properly in designated areas to allow access to and egress from the facility. When the services provided by the contractor require their employees to enter a confined space, the contractor must have a written confined space program, and it must meet OSHA's requirements for Permit-Required Confined Spaces, or PRCS. PDC expects contractors to be trained and certified prior to performing any type of confined space entry work at PDC locations. Please note that PDC encourages contractors to consider alternate methods of completing the work to eliminate the need for PRCS entry. All qualified contractors who are to conduct confined space entry operations must obtain information about confined space hazards and entry operations from PDC and perform a written job safety analysis, or JSA, prior to commencing work. All potential sources of toxic fumes and flammable vapors must be identified, isolated, and controlled while the work is taking place. Qualified contractors must also provide equipment such as personal protective equipment, testing equipment, communications devices, alarm systems, lighting, access ladders, scaffolding if necessary, and rescue equipment. All equipment will have documented inspection and/or certification records, for example, gas monitors. PDC requests that non-permit and permit-required confined space entry work be done with the prior approval of an authorized PDC representative after completing PDC's confined space entry checklist. Once the checklist has been completed, the contractor should use its company confined space entry permit to complete the required task, if necessary. Additional training and certification, such as high-angle rescue and detection and control of flammable substances, may be required, depending on the nature of the PRCS work to be performed. These elements should be identified and discussed with an authorized PDC representative before starting any confined space entry work. This section applies to the use of electrical power to operate equipment and electrical power tools, and to all work near electrical systems, including but not limited to overhead or underground power lines and existing surface installations. PDC expects that all portable electrical equipment used at PDC facilities will conform to the National Electrical Code and all relevant OSHA and other related regulations, including applicable design safety standards, work practices, and maintenance requirements. Installation of electrical systems or modifications to electrical systems, such as wiring, should be done only under a licensed electrician's supervision and with all necessary permits in place. In addition, the contractor should ensure that all electrical equipment is properly grounded and/or bonded and treated as if it were energized to prevent the buildup of static electricity, which can cause sparks, and determine if the work area will require equipment rated for hazardous atmospheres. Finally, contractors should ensure that workers near overhead lines know the voltage of the lines and the safe approach distance. To guard against falls, all work areas, walkways, runways, and platforms elevated more than 4 feet, whether they are permanent or temporary, should be safe, sturdy, and enclosed by a guardrail, mid-rail, etc., of appropriate height. Where there is a hazard to the personnel working below the elevated work area, toe boards should be in place. All floor openings must have either a securely installed covering that leaves no openings more than 1 inch wide or a standard railing with a toe board on all exposed sides. Any elevated platform or work area should be constructed, maintained, and used in accordance with OSHA regulations. When an excavation job is conducted, proper planning is essential. The competent person identified by the contractor must conduct a thorough hazard assessment of the job site to determine what measures are necessary to carry out the work in a safe manner. PDC expects that any ground disturbance or excavation will be conducted according to OSHA standards. In any safe trenching and excavation job, the contractor should request professional location of underground utility lines through the applicable state program, for example, via OneCall, prior to any ground disturbance or excavation work on PDC sites, and ensure its workers have the appropriate level of training in ground disturbance activities prior to performing excavation work on PDC sites. All excavations or trenches where people may be working should be sloped, shored, or otherwise completed in accordance with OSHA excavations standards. If an existing pipeline or other utility line is contacted, hit, or ruptured during ground disturbance activities, the owner of the underground facility or equipment and a PDC representative should be notified immediately. If an excavation is near roadways, moving equipment, or near pedestrian walkways, the job site procedure should include safeguards to protect the workers and the public. These protections should include posted signs, barricades, use of a flag person, and workers in reflective vests. Pre-approval must be obtained from an authorized PDC representative before permit-required hot work commences on PDC sites. Contractors performing the hot work are required to determine if any additional controls, such as lockout-tagout, confined space procedures, personal protective equipment, etc., are necessary prior to commencing hot work on PDC sites. Examples of where hot work permits are required: within 150 feet of operating production equipment or facilities, within 150 feet of drilling, well servicing, or workover operations being conducted on a well location, and during pipeline tie-in or replacement when flammable and/or combustible gases or vapors may be present. A permit remains in effect only for the duration of the work shift in which it is issued. The contractor or subcontractor must provide all necessary equipment, such as combustible or flammable gas testing equipment, fire protection, communications equipment, and any necessary rescue equipment. All equipment must have documented inspection or certification records. All contractors must have a formal lockout-tagout system in place. All contractor and subcontractor employees must be trained in using those safe work practices that comply with regulations and company policies. Contractors must supply all required materials, equipment, and training for their workers to comply with this requirement. When the contractor's machinery or PDC's equipment is shut down for servicing or repairs, the equipment will be locked out and tagged by trained authorized employees following applicable regulations and company policies. The contractor must discuss the proposed lock and tag locations with an authorized PDC representative before they are allowed to proceed with their planned work. The contractor's employees may work only under their own lock and tag and should always verify the machinery or equipment is in fact de-energized before beginning any work on the equipment. Once the work is complete, the contractor performing the work under lockout-tagout is responsible for notifying authorized and affected personnel before removing their lockout-tagout devices. Re-energizing the machinery or equipment can only be done by the authorized person. PDC expects contractors to assess the hazards present at each job site based on the task performed and to ensure its employees wear the appropriate PPE to protect themselves per OSHA regulations. Contractors and subcontractors are responsible for selecting, providing, maintaining, and inspecting all PPE used by their employees. PPE should be visually inspected before each use, and a periodic inspection per manufacturer's recommendations should be performed and documented. Also, contractors must ensure that all PPE is in good condition and is used or worn correctly per the manufacturer's specifications. It is the contractor's responsibility to ensure that their employees are adequately trained in the proper uses, limitations, and maintenance of the PPE used by their employees. ANSI-approved eye protection, face shields, gloves, and/or other PPE are to be provided by the contractor to its employees for use during the work, as determined during the pre-job safety meeting for the work being performed. Contractors and subcontractors must provide their workers with flame-resistant clothing, or FRC, for work on all PDC sites. In addition, all personnel on site at PDC facilities will maintain their FRC garments according to the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, Standard 2112, which means that the clothing must be flame-resistant. At a minimum, the outermost layer of FRC clothing must cover the arms, legs, and trunk. Contractors are required to conduct pre-job safety meetings to assess each step of the task and identify any elements that could pose a threat to the environment, result in injury to personnel, or damage equipment. These meetings should ensure that all affected individuals are made aware of job site hazards and about how to eliminate and/or control them. On sites where multiple contractors or subcontractors will be conducting concurrent operations, each contractor is to be familiar with the work to be performed by the other contractors on or around the job site. In addition, the contractor directing and controlling the job site will ensure that no one enters a hazardous area unless he or she is wearing the required PPE, has reviewed the pre-job safety meeting form, and has signed off on the form to acknowledge the hazards. By watching this video, the contractor acknowledges their obligation to take responsibility for compliance with all environmental, health, and safety rules, regulations, ordinances, and other laws, and for directing, overseeing, and controlling activities of its own employees and subcontractors on any PDC site. All contractors and subcontractors should understand that the expectations addressed in this video are designed to mitigate the occurrence of accidents or other incidents at PDC's sites. The contractor is solely responsible for ensuring that all contractor employees and subcontractor personnel comply with these expectations, and that people and property are protected from injury and damage as a result of contractor and subcontractor operations at PDC's sites. Contractors and subcontractors should immediately direct any questions, comments, or concerns relating to this video or any other environmental, health, and safety matters to an authorized PDC representative. Thank you.